Welcome to Romera Records podcast. Today we have on Leanne. How's it going?
Good.
Good, good. So yeah, we finally made it on. Um,
Yeah.
had to reschedule a couple times, but it's good to have you on. So yeah, let's basically just get into what you do. You have a lot of expertise in the sexology. Is that correct?
Yeah, sexology and anthropology. Yeah, so I can describe a little bit about how I became who I am. Is I began my professional training in anthropology, and then along the way, I got more and more interested in looking at gender, sexuality, partnering patterns, and things that ultimately led me to go for a PhD in sexology. So I just released a book. It's published by Roman and Littlefield, and it's called 177 Lovers and Counting: My Life as a Sex Researcher. And how I see all this is that I've been studying sex through the lens of anthropology ever since I was a teen and trying to make sense of what's going on with adults and how I wanted to manage my own life. And I was living as a young person in the San Francisco Bay Area, which back when I was a young person was the hotbed of second wave feminism and the sexual revolution. And so I was impacted by all kinds of things that folks close to 30 were doing. And I was like all of 16 and onwards. And so I'm like struggling with what I'm hearing and trying to figure out how I want to live my own life. So that's kind of the beginning part of my journey where I'm reading such essays as The Myth of the Vaginal Orgasm and hearing about the work of um, feminists who were celebrating female independence and clitoral orgasms is the only orgasm. And I'm just very confused. And at some point, when I graduate in anthropology, I think, I need to explore some other cultures and see what else is going on because I was basically coming of age in a world where which celebrated female independence and ultimately had a very strong lesbian feminist subculture. And I tried it out lesbianism for a minute, and it didn't really make any sense to me I mean, I had really close girlfriends, but I never felt like they could be my romantic partners.
Hmm.
They could just be my besties. And so I find my way to these little villages in Mexico where I get to do the celebrated field work that anthropologists um, do, where I live in a village and embed myself with a family and a community and start absorbing their ways. And so this is like 1975, and the villagers are asking things like, ¿Por qué no estás casada? Meaning, and why aren't you married? You're 22. All the girls in our village are married. What's going on with you? And how did you manage to get here without your parents? How
Hmm.
can you live without all this adult, you're not supervised. What to do with you? And so they would, you know, find me some guy in the village and say, he could be your husband, and I'd say, "No, no, no. I have a boyfriend. He's back in home. When I return home, we'll get it together." And I was like trying to normalize myself for their worldviews.
Hmm.
And then at the same time, I'm finding myself in cities and places where I'm not in a village. And Mexican men are hitting on me. I'm cute and 22, and suddenly I'm experiencing a completely other male. These guys, this is a time where feminism had not yet infiltrated Mexican culture and machismo was king. And so these guys were super self-assured, dominant, um, very openly sexual, and I found that I really liked it. It was something that I had never experienced because I was so used to being one of these I'll take care of my own orgasm feminists. So that impacted me in a very interesting way in terms of that series of adventures. And then I found my way to graduate school in New York City. And again, it was a completely other culture than California. Folks were a, were a little guarded, but then somehow if you broke through, and it didn't take much to break through, they wanted to become your friends. And so I'd meet folks on subways. I'd meet lots of guys in my classes. I'd meet guys at parties. It was like a whole other world. And then there was this kind of conflict for me between meeting a nice Jewish boy, which my parents would have loved, and having the adventures of my life. And there's like this sort of crowning moment where I'm dating this Jewish guy, which one of my friends introduced me to. And by the third date, he takes me to meet his mother. And she looks at us and said, "Oh my God, you guys would make the most gorgeous grandchildren, and I'll babysit." And he and I are like, "What? We're 25 years old. We have dreams. He wants to be a poet. I want to go do anthropology all over the world. The last thing we want to do is reproduce the next Jewish generation." And then out of nowhere, he takes me to a New Year's Eve party. This is the eve of 1979. And he knows there's a lot of other anthropology grad students going there, and he figures, well, I'll fit in and it'll be cool. So I walk in and I meet this guy who totally resonates with my energy. And he's just published a book on the slums of Naples, Italy, and suddenly we're just like dancing all over the room. I'm stuffing my phone number in his pocket. And the next thing I know, my boyfriend breaks up with me, which is just fine because we were both just kind of frozen by what was expected of us. And I start dating this guy who's brilliant and funny and introduces me to sexual activities I didn't even know had a name and a subculture attached to them. He would like throw me on the bed and pin me down and whack my butt, and I just loved it, and I had no idea that this was BDSM. I just knew that something in me just really loved it. And so that's kind of a bit of my early 20-ish adventures. And then eventually I find my way to Los Angeles, and suddenly I'm living in this place that's really, really different from New York and from the Bay Area. People are really, really image conscious.
Mm.
And they're basically all the women I'm meeting say they want to get married. And yet I'm noticing they're not getting married and that they're looking for something that they'll never find. And I start like, and at that point, there were like newspaper personal ads and eventually some of those phone ads. The apps didn't exist yet. And so I like think, well, I guess I have to join them and start dating. And and at some point, it becomes clear to me that we're in this really weird situation where the women are substantial enough that they don't really need to get married for identity, for resources. And as for reproduction, they might as well go to a sperm bank. But nonetheless, they're going through the motions. And so I end up with this idea for what started out as a movie of the week because I was in Los Angeles and everybody makes movies, but eventually it became a book and it was called Women Who May Never Marry: The Reasons, Realities, and Opportunities. So this book came out in 1993, and I just was hit the wave of questioning the place of um, marriage in terms of what folks really needed to make their lives complete. And I was like put on all the national TV shows. I was doing morning drive time radio interviews every day of the week. Articles about me got syndicated across the country. And so I was just like this cultural phenomena. And I wrote it for a while. And then there was nothing more I had to say, and I had to find other things to do.
Mm,
And at the time, I had partnered with someone who was just the most lovely person, but who became really distraught at how much I was out of the house doing media stuff and chasing attention, and how little I was doing home life. And he got involved with another woman. And now this wasn't an unusual thing for me because back in New York, when I had been with the guy who showed me all those erotic adventures, I also had a home partner who who went along with this because he had his adventures.
mm,
And so I figured we could do this. I didn't realize what was going on was the woman he'd connected with thought that because he'd gotten involved with her, she presumed he was just jump starting a monogamous relationship with him.
mm,
But he didn't plan on that. He just never cleared it with me. And so we ended up in a really challenging situation because she wanted him full time. I had no experience with sharing somebody in a 50-50 kind of way because all I'd ever done was something very part time. I lived with one person and once a week I saw the other guy, and every so often my partner got together with somebody, and it was never something that was so disruptive. I was I and at that point we're like in the early 90s and polyamory is just emerging as a thing that has a name. And I meet some folks and I say, "Well, how do you manage this?" And they were just useless. So I went to Africa. And because Africa had at least the villages I went to had a long-standing tradition of multiple partner marriages. And so I ended through some contacts, embedding myself in a little village in Kenya that hugs the edge of Lake Victoria. And everyone in the village found out that I was there to understand how wives shared a single husband. So, and there were a couple of young folks there who are on leave from university, and they became my translators, but also my cultural explainers because everyone wanted me to interview them. So every day we had an interview, and I'd bring my camera and shoot a couple of photos and listen to the stories. And then when we'd leave, my interviews would inform me how much these people had glossed over what was really going on. So I got the public story and then the inside story, and eventually started sorting it all out. Now, one of the things that was really interesting at this time was that this was the year that it was about 1998. It was the year that Bill Clinton had the affair with Monica Lewinsky, and it was international news. And so these folks would say, "Hey, that makes no sense that that president of yours, who only has one daughter, isn't having another child with that girl Monica."
Mm,
Because his wife looks kind of old. Maybe she's barren. Maybe she can't have more kids. But the husband, that Bill Clinton really needs a son, and that Monica could give him a son, and then he'd have a legacy. And so it was really interesting to take on their worldview of all things, um, and then infuse that with the situations of my country, my culture, and what was possible for me. Eventually, I do come back home, and soon I start, trying to figure out, well, both how am I gonna make sense of all these stories I've collected. And so I start publishing essays like Adding a Co-Wife and contrasting what I did with what I learned about in Africa. And then eventually I find my way to a doctoral program at a school in San Francisco called the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality, and I do my dissertation on it on exactly what I went through: jealousy and transformation in polyamorous relationships. So use my Africa research and for the first time in my life start doing statistics. Because I'd never, as an anthropologist, we always do something called participant observation, where we, eh, you know, engage others, embed ourselves in a community, embed ourselves in relationships, and then both reflect on what it's like to be in those relationships, as well as what it look at larger meanings and structures and such. But suddenly I'm doing surveys. So I start surveying all, and this is before there was really anything like SurveyMonkey or easy to use survey software. It was something where I'd send out uh, an attached email doc with the survey and tell these people, print it out, fill it out with your pen and pencil, and mail it back to me. And so this was they had to be pretty motivated to want to do this. And yet quite a few of them did, because these folks connected to polyamory really wanted research done on their culture. They wanted it to be better understood. And I was in a situation where I really could speak the language. And so I got a decent return rate and then basically assessed that polyamory was an invented culture.
mm,
It's something where people gave names to certain practices, looked at emotional states, and imposed names and expectations for those states. For example, one of the names that was extremely important was the notion of compersion, which was having positive regard for your partner being with someone else and being really happy for your partner doing that. And that was the kind of thing I was dealing with. And like most mainstream folks have no positive regard for the thought of it. And so this was a really specific culture with specific practices that allowed this. So that ultimately led to my dissertation. And then it led to basically writing a wave of doing quite a few keynotes on polyamory and jealousy for different conferences and opening up a counseling practice for folks who were struggling with polyamory and jealousy and things like this. And so that's I guess, a bit of my story. What ultimately happened was I got a little tired of polyamory after a while and started doing all kinds of other research. Everything from the transition from arranged marriage to love marriage, both looking at my own family, where my grandparents were in arranged marriage, my parents were in a love marriage, and I was just in the thick of confusion over which way to go and how to live. And noting that in India, this conundrum or cycle that my family experienced in 3 generations, contemporary Indians are experiencing all in 1 generation. So, and then I did a bit of study of sex tourism in Thailand. I had the opportunity to go to mainland China and be part of a sex research conference there. So many different stories and adventures are in my book.
Awesome. A lot to unpack of what you just said.
I know
So,
you said I could just go,
yeah,
so
yeah,
I guess
yeah.
I went for a while.
Okay, so I would like to go back to you were in Mexico, right? So you said you were young, you're doing some stuff there, and people were questioning why you were single, all this kind of stuff. So how did you feel, I guess, being questioned about that and how you wanted to live your life? Because I think there is a bit of pressure on young females today to not be a housewife, to go out and do stuff, and at the same time there is social pressure. I would say that pressure of the to not be a housewife comes from corporate America. And again, I'm just talking about America. Awesome that you talked about different countries, but I think in America, the push is female CEO, female, manager, stuff like that. But at the same time, on if you're on social media, it's like, look sexy, get this boob job, get these BBLs and get a big butt and all this stuff, and then find you a man that can take care of you. So it's kind of like a different world depending on where you're at. So what do you think about how you felt then compared to how young females probably feel now?
It's actually not that different.
Hmm.
It was, I was being impacted very heavily by feminism, which was about gender equality and about being my own person and having my own identity and ultimately earning my own money. Now, the same time, I was basically getting these questions from my parents about, do you have health insurance? If you had a husband, you could, and he had a decent job, like he was an attorney or a doctor or whatever they thought the Jewish men of the day should be. You would be cared for, and instead you're just bouncing around, going to different countries, doing all this writing, doing starting being a teacher, but you're not making enough money to sustain a family. And so they were very concerned. And that was sort of their message of you're not looking towards the future. And the only future they could imagine was a future where I'm sustained by a husband or partnering with a guy and sharing expenses and having a household together. So, not too dissimilar from the pressures of young women today is like be your own person, be an influencer, be, a social media star, but then the same time, there's a yearning for stability, grounding, family, and are you going to do it on your own? And one of the things that I also address in my book is having a child on your own.
Hmm.
Because at some point, that was what looked to me like the only option. I was living with a guy, but he already had kids and he really didn't want more. And I really wanted a kid.
Mm.
And so we were, kind of stuck. And I ended up doing all kinds of fertility options trying to have this kid. It and it was a very expensive and emotionally painful journey, and it didn't result in a kid. It just resulted in spending a lot of money and feeling like both sad and then at the same time being a researcher. I ended up taking that whole journey and doing quite a few presentations at different conferences on a topic I called How the Bow Bends. And it was the whole journey of infertility and becoming a single mother by choice, and the folks who were doing it, and how they were doing it, and how they were taking donations and embryo donations and trying to configure families that they would call their own.
So another thing that you,
And I mean, at that time, that we didn't yet have egg freezing. These days, a young woman could do that and hope that the when it came time, she could defrost these eggs and create some babies. Um, all I had available to me was egg adoption or embryo adoption. It was too late for me to go after my own eggs by the time I was ready for this.
mm. So another thing that you talked about was the party, right? So you go to the party and there's the guy that you meet, and you said you're stuffing your phone number in his pocket and having fun and dancing. Then you and your current boyfriend break up. Um, that's a movie, that's a movie script. That's something that I don't think happens to most people, I would say.
Really?
I don't know anybody who has that story. I'll say
Oh,
that.
really?
What do you feel like? Do you feel like that was something that you're glad it happened? Like I know you're not currently married and happy with that specific person, but are you happy that that experience happened?
Absolutely. It was a life-changing experience. I mean, even though I had chased engaged different guys in Mexico that were dominant and exciting. This guy was an intellectual match as well.
Mm,
We spoke the language of anthropology. He was like a bit older than me, so he functioned a bit as a mentor, which I enjoyed. And we just had one of these connections that changed my life.
mm,
And I don't think I would have been happy with a life um marrying the guy that took me to the party.
mm,
It's interesting. I ended up looking him up online. Um, and discovered that, even though he went to chase down an MFA in poetry, he ultimately became an attorney, partnered at a law firm, and had a couple of daughters, and lived a relatively mainstream life.
mm.
Um, I, I look at lives like that, and I'm happy for those folks, but I don't think I could have done it. And I think meeting the guy I met just kind of awakened me to a much richer life in terms of eroticism and in terms of just a huge dance of ideas and engagement.
So the then you have the sexual experiences that were different with this guy.
Right.
When you are encountering this, what what is going through your mind as far as your past sexual encounters compared to this guy? Did you have like I've
Well,
been
actually, what's really the question is how I was rectifying this with my home partner. Because I was, soon after dating him, he basically said, "Look, I already I lived in Long Island. I had a daughter. I had a wife. I couldn't do this. I needed to live in New York City and and he was bi and he like was there right before AIDS became a thing. And so he was, he was like in the post Stonewall pre-AIDS moment.
mm,
And he was in both also engaging guys. And and it was still the time of, where today we have all the non-binary stuff. Back then we basically had, lesbian feminism. And so, I thought I could dodge the lesbian thing by moving to New York. No way. After I joined these anthropology women's groups to hear lectures and network. And then after the meeting, they go to gay bars. And so it just was that was the culture and that was what was around us. So um so nonetheless, here I am, like basically seeing this exciting guy once a week because he's also has this other life. And then I soon meet someone who basically becomes a domestic partner and, a potential husband.
mm,
And we have a very good connection, but it's not sexually amazing. It's sexually good.
mm,
He's basically a vanilla guy.
yeah.
And nothing wrong with vanilla guys. He, was, adventurous in his own ways, but mostly it had to do with we did some amazing hiking and backpacking trips and, and just had a community of folks that were associated with trying to make the world a better place. But so I'm like basically it's a very private thing. Like I'd go over to the exciting guy's house on Wednesday night. We'd have this amazing conversation. He was Italian. He'd cook me amazing food and then we'd just have this extraordinary sex with and he was doing poppers. I mean, it was just a whole other world from the world I'd ever known.
Poppers.
And poppers, amyl nitrate, you sniff it and it raises your heart rate and it kind of intensifies the experience.
Hmm. I actually never heard of
Well,
it.
no, no worries. Anyway, but it's, I mean, I guess people use Viagra for this wasn't like an erection thing. It was just a heart rate thing and opening up the blood vessels thing to just have more intensity. So he was like chasing an intensity
Mm,
that I never knew about. I was just came out and came of age in Berkeley where the big deal was that women had to have orgasms and they should not be faking orgasms. And if the partner and there wasn't a lot about partner communication. There was basically, you gotta, take care of yourself if he doesn't know how to take care of you. And there wasn't a lot of really helpful information about how to explore and communicate with a partner.
mm,
So anyway, we're doing this, and then I come home because I didn't like staying over his house because he had 2 separate beds, and I didn't wanna stay alone in a bed after all this. So I'd come home and just curl into my side of the bed with my home partner, and not discuss a word of what was going on
Hmm.
because what was there to say?
Yeah, and that could be very detrimental to
Sure.
that to that
Yeah.
relationship. Just
Yeah.
explaining to some your other partner how exciting somebody else is.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that
And it wasn't like, and he was like still the better partner for me
mhm,
because, we had so much in common in terms of values and art and vision for the world. It just was, we didn't do he couldn't kick that stuff up in me. And I remember like I hit the moment with him when he and I had moved to the Bay Area after living, I'd finished grad school. He and we decided we'd move to the Bay Area because I had family there. And then, but we still like had a lot of friends in New York. And I remember like a year later or something flying back to New York to go to a friend's wedding. And I see the other guy while I'm there. And then it just totally rekindles what that stuff was.
mm,
And I'm like so distraught. What do I do with myself? And so I come back to the Bay Area and tell my partner, look, you got to try this. Please, please, just hold me down. Just do this, just do that. And he kind of went through the motions, but he wasn't a dom. He
mm,
couldn't do it. And and then I just sat in this puddle of confusion of like I really this I it's like once you've tasted something that is intriguing to you and kicks up energy that you've never otherwise accessed, it becomes important.
mm,
And so there I was, like just lost. And so, I'm like trying to, it's like we never had a closed relationship. So I tried dating other guys, and God, the first guy I get super attracted to is someone I'm working with on a project. And it turns out he's gay and has a home partner. And then within a year, they both die of AIDS.
mm,
And
mm,
so this was the 80s, and it was a very sad and confusing time.
mm,
When I first moved to LA, I said, well, I'm going to make sure that, I'm going to find someone who gets this stuff. So I start chasing down some group called The Threshold that has some meetings, and I meet someone who's actually an archaeologist, subfield of anthropology, and he kind of gets that I want to see things and try things, and he takes me to swing parties and he takes me to dungeon parties, and so I get to see a lot of it, and then I kind of face that what I like is so minimal that there's no point in joining the scene. It's not, I don't want to be hung from the rafters. I don't want to have people watching weird stuff happening to me. It's like what I like is basically something that any number of people could like, and it's not a real big deal. And
it was just a little more spice than what you were getting.
right. Yeah, it wasn't, it was, and I guess upon reflection, kind of moderate. It wasn't a big deal. But I had no idea, where, anything fit it in with anything else until I met these other folks and saw them in cages and saw them with whips and chains and, all kinds of gear and costumes. And I thought, I couldn't do any of this. This is just like very extreme to me. Though, of course, with my anthropological lens, I'm appreciating all of it and as best as I can, getting appreciating their headspace and what works for them and the intense intensity they're able to ramp up for themselves and their partners. so, and then it's really interesting because some many years later, I start dating someone who ends up um, becoming a, a live-in partner, and he's into the Dom thing, and he has his whole tool box, and so we do stuff, and then like, there's a big disconnect because he's broke
Mm,
and I have money and I own the house. And he's like trying to tell me what to do with the house. And he says, "Oh, we need an accent wall." And so it's like I'm supposed to fund everything that he comes up with as an idea. And and he's nonstop. Every day there's a new idea of what to do for the house. And then there's all the chargy sex. And then at some point, I just do a 180-degree flip, and I cannot submit to this broke person. He's just is not standing up for himself. He's just expecting me to pay for everything, to give him super reduced rent, and to go along with everything he wants to do. And then if we take a vacation, he wants me to fund the vacation because he has no money.
mm.
And and it's just like it's just like in whatever gender ideas I have to be with someone who cannot, who is so broke and yet wants to be the dom just didn't work for me. And I just called it all off.
Yeah,
And
there's a famous saying. I think it was Scarface, and it's first you get the money, then you get the power. Like
right.
it's
And
kind
there
of
was no money on his part. I
yeah.
mean, the best he could do is buy a hamburger that we'd split. I mean, I just had the hardest time with this. Maybe I wasn't enlightened about, just being the the wealthy woman who has her slaves or whatever, but it just didn't work for me. And so it was. And that was kind of the end of my appetite for any of it. I mean, just I just couldn't find my way to like that stuff anymore with the disconnect that I experienced over his, I guess, for me it was like being a pseudo dom in that he basically wanted me to fund our life.
So there's still a lot more I wanted to unpack, and we got a little bit of time left. But so you were talking about traveling to Africa, and there was more polygamy that was normalcy over there. That really gets my gears turning about religion and culture and just the difference in things. I think was it like Utah with Mormons? They're more into polygamy, correct?
Yeah.
And but traditional America, I would say Christian people are not. They're more monogamous, or even if you're atheist, I don't think polygamy is a normalcy. So we go to Africa, and I think they're more into the whole king type aspect. And I would believe in that type of culture, you would have a dominant male king, and the females are, kind of at his at his taking. What did that seem like to you? For I would assume you traveled to different villages or cultures and
Yeah,
cities.
yeah. I Yeah, I was traveling and living with folks largely in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda at the time. Later, I went to West Africa, and I've also been to North Africa and South Africa. But nonetheless, what was largely going on was guys would present themselves as wealthy enough to fund multiple wives, which
mm,
would then mean more kids, which would then mean more legacy. And what so they would kind of hedge their bets that these women would go for it. And then largely the women, let's say if they had a farm or they were fishermen, they would work in the family business and cause it to be more successful because they were workers. And so at some level, it was cheaper to marry a wife than hire a worker.
wow. And that's what a lot of
And
people.
nonetheless, even in these contexts where polygamy is a tribal tradition, um, only about 20% of men can afford it
Mm,
because it takes a fair amount of personal infrastructure to sustain, a farm or multiple houses or and all the other things it does, and ultimately being able to fund all the school fees for all the kids. So that would be coming from having additional wives. So, and for some women, the deal was that there was a certain status in being connected to a wealthy man because and they may not even live with him. They just may be visited by him here and there. But there was status to that, and it wasn't the kind of day in, day out marital experience many folks in the West expect, where you have your sunset dinners and your walks on the beach or whatever you do. It's a different thing. It's a very much of a transaction in terms of status and resources.
and to go on top of what you're just talking about, like, back in the day, um, it was more expected to have multiple children as workers. You said it was cheap to marry.
Absolutely, that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of it is a financial consideration. So if you can attract fertile women who will work for you, then you'll have both them and their children all working for you and making your family more successful and making your name more successful.
Yeah, that's something that it just makes sense, as a human
Right,
biological thing
right.
to do.
Yeah, and so, a young woman might be like looking at her possibilities. Does she want to monogamously marry a guy who has nothing? Or does she want to marry a man who has some other wives and has property and has a business? And she might assess, hey, my kids will be better off in this bigger family. There'll be help from the other co-wives. Um, and there'll be money from the business, plus I can be part of the business.
Something that I currently struggle with is I have a job where I make good money. I make six figures, and I also have an adventurous side where at any moment I would be completely fine with quitting my job and traveling the world. I have a wife, and she loves to travel as well
Oh,
and to be adventurous.
hmm
And I feel like a part of her would love to do that now or at any time, same like me. And but a part of me loves doing what I currently do, but I'm just like at any moment I could just I could just stop this and we could just, travel, and I want to do that while I'm young. A lot of
yeah,
people are like
yeah.
save your money, save money, and then when you get old, travel the world. It's like, yeah, but why would you want to do that when you're old when you could just do it when you're young? I mean, I know it makes more sense when you have money, save it up and then do it.
Well, hmm
Oh no, I'd rather travel while I'm young and be able to experience it more, like the hiking and stuff like that. So,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I guess I've done it both ways. I I did some extraordinary travel when I was young. I was like in at that time in 1998, I was in Africa for 6 months. and living in all kinds of villages. It wasn't like I had uh I was teaching, and so I just took a semester off and just did this. Um but I am blessed with, even though I'm older now and lot of my friends are retired and traveling, I still travel on the cheap because I can, and because to me it's cheap and deep. So I still prefer to the low, the traveling like a local and
Mm,
like staying with local hosts, like either through Airbnb or couch surfing or whatever comes up, rather than staying in the fancy hotel. Because I want to experience life as they experience it.
mm.
And I figured out a long time ago how to travel cheap. At some point it was airline miles, but before that it was air ticket consolidators who could get you a really good deal on a flight. And I remember back when we went to India in 2007, I think we must have flown there for 1,000 round trip.
Mm.
And and then, it just all worked out. And
Yeah,
so much of my travels in Mexico were extremely cheap because I just stayed with locals, lived in villages, and I had the richest experiences.
yeah. It's also just the timing, like how fast you want to get there. If you want to take the flight, it's more expensive, but you could, take bus rides. Like one thing that actually shocked me, I have a friend that lives in Dallas, and I'm in Memphis, Tennessee.
Uh-huh.
My friend from Dallas was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna just take the bus up there." I was like, "Okay," and he was like, "Yeah, it's like $1." I was like, "What? $1?" And that's like a 6 hour
What
drive.
is this, a Flixbus or something, or
I'm not sure what kind of bus ride it
Yeah,
was, but
there's some of these things where if you reserve in advance, you can get, like, there's one seat for $1 or
yeah,
something.
that's what,
Um,
like, he was gonna buy the bus ride in advance, and he said it was like
right.
$1. I don't know if it was there. It might have been like $3 to get to
Yeah, you
Memphis
could
and
do
back.
that.
I
Yeah.
was like, that's
And it just,
insane.
I mean, but it also depends what else you're busy with and if you have time for all that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I actually have a little travel business where I help people find good itineraries and help them book flights or activities or whatever, because I became really good at this after a while.
Mm,
And I have a client who has plenty of money, but he appreciates that I can always find him a cost-effective, typically nonstop flight.
mm.
That because the thing that I just think is so crazy is when folks say, "Oh, well, here's a flight that only costs $52." And I said, "And it's taking you 34 hours to get there, and you have 3 layovers. Is that a good use of your time and energy?" I don't think so. And so I will refuse to let him even consider things like that. I look for a nonstop flight that's starts and ends at a reasonable time. And that's my criteria.
Yeah, I mean, it just, as I said, it depends on, how much of a hurry you're in, what you're willing to
Mhm.
spend, and your travel experience can be whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
So one more thing
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about was just I guess the difference in lifestyles. You were talking about basically people just the gay aspect, or some of the people that the guys you were talking to were bi, and how you have seen that change openly, as like in the public. I don't know if you know about this, but there was a football player who played for the University of Missouri, and then he ended up going into the NFL draft and getting. I think he got drafted. I'm not sure. Um, God, what was his name? Something Sam. I can't. Michael Sam maybe. But anyways, so very. he was the first openly gay football player, and it was, you know, headlines everywhere and stuff like that. And I don't know. I'm just not a big person on making a big deal out of that stuff because it should be normal. You know, if it was somebody who, you know, oh, this guy has no eyebrows. You know what I mean? Like it should be the same, have the same energy toward
Right.
that. If you're trying to say it should be okay, then make it seem normal. Like don't make a big deal out of it. But at the same time, you know, people want to celebrate those things and make it, you know, whatever. So how have you have seen, especially with masculinity, you know, you were talking about men, you know, some men were more masculine than others with the Mexican men that you had talked to and stuff like that. How do you feel we have viewed the gay people or bi or whatever in America?
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right that, there's a lot of different things going on. And you may recall back when Rock Hudson came out, both as having AIDS and being a gay actor who portrayed a hetero man on the set. And it exposed this whole thing about all the hidden lives of gay people who were, part of the entertainment business. And here you're talking about the sports business and everything else. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about sexual orientation and labels is at other times and places, these things weren't so binary where you're either gay or straight. There were situational times where people, engage in behaviors that we would call um, gay behaviors, but they didn't exactly have an orientation where they fell in love with the same sex.
Mm,
And there's cultures that, really have done, like think about the ancient Greeks. They had a whole thing with men who were mentors to younger men, and they engaged in erotic activities with these men. But at the same time, they had wives that, they fathered families with. And these young men grew up to also have wives. And so it's only here, in this Western moment that we have created this world of gay and then straight. And some folks have even challenged, is there really such a thing as bi?
mm,
And then, more recently, we have more and more people engaging the identity of pan, where they're pansexual and they can be attracted to, you know, anyone, anywhere, just depends on the energy of that person.
mm.
So, at some level, we're just dealing with labels and certainly we have that whole thing going on with gender identity, where before there was basically male, female, or transsexual, where if you were really not in the right body, you had to have a full on sex change operation and then convert to the other sex.
Mm.
Now you can basically live in any gender you want, any day of the week you want to live it. And so we have this whole celebration of non binary and gender fluid, and there's no need for operations anymore. Whatever you want to identify with, you can be that. And then we have this whole celebration of the they pronoun. And I noticed on your thing here, you don't say you're a he or a him or whatever, but there's folks that are very focused on, you know being accepting of of fluid or multiple gender identities.
And so this is my take on it, and
Yeah.
by any means, you know, you might see it differently, but I feel like to me, really three genders is male, female, and then I believe some people like a hermaphrodite, where you might be like in the middle,
Uh-huh.
just because your body developed. Um,
Right. Yeah.
way.
Sure. Yeah. Intersex.
Yeah, that's my take on it, and
Yeah.
then that's male,
But
female.
that's kind of biological. What
Yeah,
we're talking about is cultural.
yes. So
And
my other take is that. So what was the other? Oh, saying you are a man or a woman, that's completely different. Like I
yeah,
think,
that's cultural.
yeah, I think if you're a female, you can be manly, which
Exactly.
is cool. Like,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you could be in a woman's body and enjoying male culture or
yeah,
male, being, whatever that culture says male is, like it's dominant or
yeah,
it's, it's non-frilly or something. And then we have guys who love um the females, what our culture calls female in terms of dress and makeup and heels and whatever, and they can enjoy that
yeah,
and still be biological males.
yeah.
And,
That's
some
my
of them resonate with cross-dressing as a way to do that.
yeah. That's my simplistic.
Right, I agree
We've
with
kind of
you. And
over.
at the same time, in our culture, we fully allow females to cross-dress. Females can wear t-shirts and jeans
Yeah,
and hiking boots or whatever kind of boot they want. And they are not there's no sort of say, oh, well, you must be, anything. You're just a female wearing these clothes. But for men, if they want to dress colorful or do the makeup thing or whatever, then they, are going a whole journey in terms of identity to engage this.
yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that, the way I think is more simplistic, and then,
Uh-huh.
our society or culture has
Hmm.
kind of,
Hmm.
I believe we might have overcomplicated it. That's just my opinion. So,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
however other people think, to me, that's just the simplistic way of if
Right.
you're
Hmm.
born with male genitalia, it's if you want to dress as a quote unquote female or womanly, as I would say it, then that's just what you want to do. Like I don't think the overcomplicated way of, oh, well, they're, this way or they're that way. It's like, no, they just like wearing a dress. That's just what,
Right, sure. Well, one of the things that's really interesting is how homosexuality is engaged in other cultures, where they basically, like in many Asian and Latin American cultures, the person who penetrates is the male
mm,
and the person who receives is the female. And so in any relationship, you need a penetrator and a receiver,
hmm.
and they could both have male genitalia.
Yeah, I mean, that's again more simplistic way of
Mhm.
thinking about it
Right,
instead of trying to
right,
overcomplicate it.
right. And what's interesting is these penetrators do not identify as gay. They just identify as penetrators.
Okay. Yeah, and
And they could penetrate vaginas or they could penetrate assholes.
like you were talking about with the Greek, I don't know if
Yeah,
you've ever seen
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
the TV show Spartacus. Uh,
Yeah.
there's a lot of gay activity in it, but it's a lot of the warriors at that
Right.
time.
Right.
They
And,
would,
we with our Western labels would call it gay, but they would never think of it as something that was non-masculine. It
yeah,
was absolutely masculine and all that.
that was a bonding experience
Yeah,
for
exactly. Exactly. Very much.
what.
And warriors need to bond.
Yeah, what better way to show I
There you
respect
go. Yeah,
you?
there you go. Uh-huh.
Well, all right, let's wrap this up. I guess give everybody your info, contacts, websites,
Sure.
books,
Yeah,
all that kind of
yeah.
stuff.
Okay. Well, my book, which just came out, is called 177 Lovers and Counting. My Life as a Sex Researcher. It's available everywhere. It's available on Amazon. It's available through my publisher, Roman and Littlefield. Any number of booksellers on the internet around the world are selling it. My website is www.wisewomansexandrelationshipconsulting.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much
You're so welcome.
for
I
having me.
had so much fun talking to you. I know I was a big rambler, but it
No, it
worked
was
out.
great. Great stories and everything.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so thank you for everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.